There are lots of ways at looking at how the brain is put together and how it functions. And one of the things that's come up in popular science in the past few years is this notion that we have three brains, which is, of course, completely figurative. It's based on evolutionary theory, in which we see that we have things in common with lizards and mammals and primates. And we can see that in the changes that these brains have fantastically made over the millennia. So you might hear about the lizard brain and the mammalian brain and the primate brain or the human brain, and how they are different layers of the human brain experience. So we're going to talk through those different layers with my handy dandy brain model. And more importantly, we're going to talk about how this particular perspective allows us to consider two really important things. One is the impact of stress, and two is the impact of age. So we know that when the brain is under stress, whether it's positive stress or negative stress, it influences its ability to process information. I think of this a lot like driving a car, riding a bicycle. When we have a very heavy load to carry, or we have a really long uphill stretch, we have to downshift because it's too much work. It's too impossible to stay in a high gear and have the engine or our legs with the gear system be able to get us up that hill or help us pull that weight. So the brain sacrifices some higher level functions so that it can downshift and get into that really gritty stuff. That's what happens when we're under stress. So when we're talking about this evolutionary model, really what we're saying is that we're going from a very high human type of functioning down to a lower, more primal level as we experience higher levels of stress. This is true for adults and for kids. And the other thing, though, that's important to note is age. We know that there are huge differences in the brains between adults and kids. And this is primarily because brains take 25 years to fully mature. A quarter of a century is a long time. And for most of us as parents, that means that the entire time that our kids are living with us in our homes, they have immature brains. And man, is that frustrating. We all know how frustrating that is. On top of that, we're coming at this from a very adult, mature brain perspective, which says, hey, he should be able to do that, right? He did it last week and the week before. Why can't he do it now? Well, the thing with the maturing brain is it's not that we have pieces of the brain that are missing. It's that we're working on making these really solid neural pathways, these connections between different parts of the brain. Because while we may be able to absorb a lot of information and store it somewhere, really the glorious part of being human is being able to make meaningful connections between stuff. And that's where the brain has a lot of work to do. So in kids, that's what's happening. And I liken this a lot to road construction. So we know that the highway system is being built, the roads are being established, and it's construction season. So some days those roads are open and some days they're closed. And when they're open, they're probably really bumpy. They may have just put down gravel or oil, so they're kind of hard to navigate. There are probably no signs up, so you may not know where you're going. You don't know how long it's going to take to get there because part of the road is closed to allow the heavy machinery to come through. All of these things. This is what it's like in a child's brain. Yeah, the road is there, but it's not finished, and it may not go anywhere just yet, right? So let's talk about these areas in the brain. I'll show you my handy dandy brain model, which you have at home, by the way, too. Haha, how cool is that? We'll jump right in because I only have 15 minutes and there's a lot to say. So this is the brain stem. This is the part that connects with the spinal cord. This is the middle part of the brain where we have the sensory cortex, the amygdala, the hypothalamus, those kinds of things, and we'll talk about those. And this is the cerebral cortex, which is at the very top. So you see how I made that nifty brain model? You can do it too. Ha-ha! The power of the brain is in your hand. The cerebral cortex is the part of the brain that we think about as being the brain. It's what we recognize from the brain picture, that big wrinkly mass. It takes up most of the brain. And this is incidentally what takes 25 years to develop. So it's not only the stuff that's in the cerebral cortex, but it's the connection between the cerebral cortex and this middle section of the brain. All of the sensory information that's coming in, plus the limbic system, that emotional area where we have the home base for things like rage and lust and separation distress, which, as you can imagine, in kids is a really active area because biologically, children are meant to be physically close to their parents while they're vulnerable. So when they're separated, of course it's distressing, and it's distressing for some kids a lot more than others. That's biological. That is biological. This also hosts areas for play and for bonding. It's really cool stuff. So if we're talking about this like the floors of a house, this would be the basement where we have the water heater and the electrical panel, some of the plumbing. This is what keeps the lights on. So every second, the brain receives millions of messages from throughout the body. There's a plane going overhead that's really loud, about what exactly is going on. What's happening with viruses and bacteria? What's happening with respiration? What's happening with the heart? What's happening with muscles? All of that stuff. And this is all subconscious. This is a gift of evolution because we have this space to process all of the things that we need to do to get through the day, to survive, but we don't have to allocate any cognitive space for it. We don't have to think about this stuff. It just happens. Because of that, this doesn't really have a lot to do with behavior, so we're not going to talk about it. We just don't go into the basement very much. This is the main floor of your house. This is where your kitchen is, your bathroom, your family common areas. This is where you hang out, right? And that makes a lot of sense because this is where we're taking in information about what we see, what we hear, what we touch, what we understand as far as language, how we speak, how we feel, how we process memories and store them, and the amygdala, how we sense threats. So in our home, we have an alarm system, and in our brain, we have the amygdala, which is the brain's alarm system. The amygdala's job is to say, I see something that's threatening. We need to move. Now, the amygdala, if it's unchecked, is going to stimulate other parts of the brain that release hormones, stress hormones. So we're talking about adrenaline, cortisol, norepinephrine, lots of other stress hormones. These dump into the bloodstream in large amounts because we're ready to go. We need to do something, and they stay in the bloodstream for a while. Now, the problem is if the amygdala goes off unchecked and signals a threat that's not all that threatening, then we're stuck being flooded with all of these stress hormones in our blood, and we're feeling very much like we need to respond to things. This is what creates people that come across as being very combative and defensive, and it's because they feel threatened, because their brains have told them, you are under attack. Amygdala, amygdala, amygdala. And they really can't fight that because they lack this part up here, the cortex, that jumps in and says, oh, well, wait a minute, let's look at this logically. The last time this happened, this is what we did, and these were the consequences, so let's try that again, or let's do something different. The cortex may not have enough connections to be able to jump in and save the day and say, slow down, amygdala, you don't have to trigger any stress release. You don't have to trigger a stress response. So we see these people, adults and kids, that feel like they're in this constant state of defending themselves, that they're very defiant, they may be very aggressive. They're difficult people to be around, but also this is any of us on a day where there are a lot of little things that have happened. Maybe we got stuck in really bad traffic, and maybe people at work or at school said things that just didn't sit well with us, and we're not feeling very well, so we have that stress, and all of these things are piling up, and the amygdala essentially gets to the point where it can override the cortex, which may have been saying all day, not a problem, not a problem, not a problem, not a problem. But it gets to the point where it's tired, or maybe the pathways aren't working as well, or maybe it's the wrong pathway that it's going down. And so the amygdala says, oh, hey, I finally got through. Let's put through some stress hormones. Now, when you're working with somebody that is in this place where they're feeling very stressed. And what I mean by this is that you're going to see extreme emotional responses because this is where the limbic system is too, right? The rage that comes up a lot. The separation distress, that comes up a lot. So somebody that's giving you a really intense emotional experience is feeling threatened and is very much triggered. So here's what we do. We go low and slow. We are going to, because we know that this person is feeling threatened, this person essentially feels like a prey animal. Like they're being chased down, because that's what the amygdala is saying. So making sure that we slow down our speech, that we use fewer words, because this executive functioning in the cortex, that's not working so well right now. The brain says, yeah, you're not really needed. We're having a stressful moment here, so we need to downshift. Speaking very plainly, slowly, using a low tone of voice. So not the high parentese kind of soothing type of voice, but really low and slow, very steady, very calm. Taking some deep breaths, allowing this person time to let all of those hormones, the chemicals that are in the bloodstream, have a chance to do what it is that they need to do in a safe place, and then wash out, because they're going to stay in there for a while. But until they really start going away, it's going to be hard to make some logical progress, which is really what we need to do. So being able to recognize that is important. That means that you as the parent have to not freak out and activate your amygdala too, or let your amygdala do the activating, right? You've got to stay low and slow yourself, or have somebody help you do that. Other things that are really helpful for this are coming in from a non-threatening place physically. Now for kids, this means getting down on the floor and getting at or below their eye level, because looking down on them, we're bigger, we're stronger in most cases. We control the resources, we're threatening. And so when we're upset and when we're communicating frustration and maybe anger, that feels very threatening to the child. So, making sure that you're looking out for that coming through in yourself, but also seeing this from your child's perspective. So bring it down a notch and be able to really connect with your child in that way. Instead of facing your child, stand side by side or sit side by side. Avoiding eye contact can be very useful, because that can also feel extremely threatening. So there are lots of things that you can do to try to slow down that response, because you want to give the body time to downshift and do what it needs to do, because it's going to take time to do that. So you can eventually get back into gear and go back up to this cortex, go back upstairs, and practice some of that logical thinking and say, okay, well, so we have this problem. What are we going to do about it? What are our options? Have we done this before, and what happened? What can we learn from that? And that's where we want to go with our kids. That's also where we want to go as adults, because we are responsible for our own behavior, and that's the really, really hard part of this, is to being able to check yourself. So the discussions that I recommend that parents have with each other, with their partners, with themselves, and with their kids are about going upstairs or downstairs. When you feel like you're responding to something, you're going downstairs. And you need to know that you're going downstairs, and it's okay to be downstairs. But if you're downstairs and somebody else in your family is upstairs yelling at you to come upstairs, that doesn't work. So being able to acknowledge that and understand what it is that you need and what you need from other people to have that time downstairs in your family room, in your kitchen, before you can go back upstairs and be productive. There's so much more to say about this, and we will dive into a lot more in other 15-minute sessions. But